Why are you going all Jason Bourne on this, man? Come on. Wiley getting kidnapped at the exact moment I finally get a lead on the Grail? It's so cliche. It's obviously just the algorithming.
First of all, Jay Bourne is a legend, so cheers for the compliment. Second, algorithms don't do kidnappings.
Jay Bourne is a legend. And you are legends for tuning into this episode of Decoding TV. Hello, welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. I'm David Chen.
I'm Siddhant Adlakha.
Welcome to the podcast, and welcome to This Week in Streaming, a new show on the Decoding TV podcast feed, where we talk about the latest and greatest and most interesting stuff that's in the world of streaming today. We'll tell you if a show is worth watching, and eventually we'll review and spoil and discuss the entire season of the television shows that we cover, at least the good ones. Today we'll be covering Mrs. Davis, the new Peacock streaming original series. First 5 episodes of the show are live right now. We've seen the first 4 episodes. Next week, Siddhant and I will be wrapping up our coverage of Dead Ringers, which is streaming right now on Prime Video. And then Siddhant is heading to the Cannes Film Festival for a few weeks. He will not be covering that for Decoding TV. Siddhant, where will you be covering that for, by the way?
A bunch of different places. I'll be at Joy Sauce, Truth Dig, IGN, and gosh, there's one more, IndieWire. Yeah.
Wow.
So at least those 4.
Never heard of any of those sites, but good luck to them. I hope they have best of luck in the future. But no, seriously though, those are all very awesome websites, and very excited to see Siddhant's coverage over at the Cannes Film Festival. But he will be with us for Dead Ringers, and then there will be a new co-host joining me to finish off coverage of shows like Mrs. Davis and to cover other shows in the future. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. You can email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Decoding TV. We are broadcasting live right now at Decoding TV on YouTube and on Twitch at the username Decoding TV. And we are going to start by talking about whether people should watch Mrs. Davis. We are then going to do a little recap, and then we're going to get to overall thoughts and specific topics before we wrap up with our favorite quotes from the episodes we've watched. So again, we have watched 4 episodes of Mrs. Davis. It's airing weekly on Peacock. I think there's going to be 8 episodes total. Within one sentence, Siddhant Adlakha, you want to tell people whether or not they should watch Mrs. Davis?
I need you to go first on this one.
I am going to say I don't know. Because
okay,
it's a really, really weird show that has a lot of great elements in it, and it's very, very funny. But I do think that it's a very specific acquired taste, and also like it's possible that the ending is going to wrap everything up in a really satisfying and interesting way, but without that, the question is it worth watching? And it's like, I think if you watch like episodes 1 and 2, you'll get a really good sense of whether you like what this show is selling. And if it's not for you, then I think there's no shame in just kind of piecing out. So I say so far it's a pretty, I don't even want to say mixed bag, because I think it's trying to do something very specific, and it does that thing pretty well. But if you're not on that wavelength, you're not going to like the show. Okay, what do you think? Should you watch Mrs. Davis, Siddhant Adlakha?
I'm glad you said that, because my response was also going to be I don't know, because look, clearly the show has its fans, and clearly it's sure of itself in a very weird way.
Absolutely.
It seems to know what it's doing. I'm just not sure I'm not sure who that's for. And again, like, there are people that it is for, but I don't know how many people. Look, when was the last time? How long has the show been out? It's been a couple of weeks, right?
Yes.
How many Mrs. Davis memes have you seen? How many times have you seen people discussing the show like it's Succession or something like that? I haven't, and like, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are watching it, and there's probably a reason for that. That being said, it is a Damon Lindelof show. He is one of the he's one of the executive producers, one of the showrunners.
Yes, along with Tara Hernandez, who's
right.
also co-creator of the show. Yeah.
Yes. And he's one of those writers who, anything he watches, anything he does, I'll give it a shot at the very least. It's a very Lindelof kind of show in the way it circles ideas of spirituality and religion, but it's also like, what if Lost was a comedy kind of. We'll get into all of that. It's I don't know how to describe it. Like okay,
I've never seen you. We've talked about many TV episodes
yeah.
and TV shows, and I've rarely seen you this flummoxed before.
Yeah,
Siddhant.
a little bit of behind the scenes thing. We have a shared document, David and I, that we keep where we keep notes, and I was going to write a recap of the show.
Yes,
And what was it that I'd left under the recap?
I think you wrote dot 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 or dot 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 question mark,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So I don't know if that is satisfying for anyone watching this YouTube, watching this on YouTube or listening to this at Decoding TV. But I would say it's a very odd show. We're going to get into the ways in which it is odd momentarily.
Hmm.
But should you watch it, I would say watch a couple episodes. And having watched 4 episodes, I can tell you that the show does not terribly deviate in terms of tone from what it does in the first episode or two, right? So like if you watch the first 2 episodes, you're like, I like this, then you're gonna keep getting that in episodes 3 and 4, you know? And we'll see what happens through episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right. So typically I'd use this time to try to recap what's going on in the show thus far. But if I attempted to do that for Mrs. Davis, you'd probably think I was under the influence of psychoactive drugs. The extremely short, abridged version of this story is Mrs. Davis, the TV show, takes place in the near future where an all powerful algorithm guides the actions of most humans on the planet. Our protagonist is a nun named Simone, previously named Lizzie before she became a nun, who hates the algorithm and wishes it didn't run people's lives. For some reason, the algorithm, personified by the name Mrs. Davis, really wants to speak to Simone, and when it finally forces her to have a conversation, Mrs. Davis gives Simone an assignment: find the Holy Grail. In return, the algorithm agrees that if Simone accomplishes this, it will shut itself off. Simone then finds herself on a globe-trotting adventure featuring a mysterious German gang that are also after the Grail, her ex Wiley and his gang of algorithm resistors, a doppelganger for the Pope, a sword competition that it feels inspired by a Mr. Beast video, and a bunch of other weird stuff. So that is the best that's just like a fraction of the things that actually happen in the first 4 episodes.
Yeah,
And
and there's jam, there's magicians,
yeah.
there's a horse, there's look, I could tell you how these things fit into the plot, but like it's not going to make much more sense. There's holy sneakers. Um
Yeah, so
there's
so
a
let's
metaphysical dino.
let's start talking about overall thoughts. So we are now going to spoil the first 4 episodes of the show. And let's kind of talk about overall thoughts on it. So like in addition to just whether you should watch it, like what are some of the things that resonated, what are the things that worked, what are the things that didn't work about Mrs. Davis?
So, like I said, I'm in the bag for anything that Lindelof works on, and because of that, I was immediately taken by, the fact that this is a show that deals with religion and spirituality in a unique way. In a lot of his work, it's and not to give him sole credit, it's just that he is the writer on the show who I'm most familiar with. Um,
And also
and
thematically it is similar to other works, but most closely I think it resembles some of the ideas from The Leftovers, I would argue. But yeah.
Yeah, whether it's the leftovers or Lost, or I think he also had a hand in writing Prometheus.
Mhm.
The all these questions of like science versus faith, and technology versus magic, and all of those are present here, but weirdly, none of the characters seem to be asking questions about it this time. Whereas in all the other things I mentioned, it's like characters, following these mysteries of life and trying to reckon with them. In this, it's like it's a magician nun who wants to retrieve the Holy Grail, not for any spiritual reasons, but just basically because she doesn't like this version of Siri and has like kind of a feud with it. And I'm fascinated by the fact that all these questions are sort of in the background, somewhere there.
Mhm.
Like maybe they'll address it. I don't know. Maybe not. I think it's there's a fun world somewhere there yet to be explored. I don't know that the show, in its first 4 episodes at least, explores it in necessarily a satisfying way, but I'm curious about what comes next. So I can say that much for the first four.
This is a odd and frustrating show, I think,
Hmm.
because uh the first episode begins very interestingly. Like, we are back in the Middle Ages. There's a whole thing about the Holy Grail and the Knights Templar who are protecting the Holy Grail, and like you're kind of wondering the whole time, how does that tie in with present day? Meanwhile, we fast forward to the present day. We're introduced to this character who's kind of a Tom Hanks castaway type, and after being rescued, after being marooned on a desert island for 10 years, we are then introduced to the idea that an algorithm runs the entire planet. And so I'm thinking to myself, ooh, interesting. That's interesting. Like, that presents significant implications for the human condition and what modern society is like, virtually none of which is not even explored, barely even addressed. Like,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like, if there is an algorithm running the whole world, I'm curious, like, how does that work? Like, how do people
yeah,
receive their instructions? Are people medicated? Do they, I have like 50 questions. And again, it's not even that it's not explored. It's literally not even addressed. Like, they barely even reference that again. Do you know? It's only referenced primarily because the algorithm, also known as Mrs. Davis and called other things in different countries, takes control of people and people serve as proxies, where the algorithm then can then communicate with Simone, who is our main character, played by Betty Gilpin. That is really cool. That's a cool idea. Like the
yeah.
idea that,
And
yeah.
I
Go
should
ahead, Siddhant.
clarify that
Yeah,
I should clarify that the algorithm doesn't so much take control of them in a literal sense. It's that these people are more like willing proxies for the algorithm, was
right. Yeah,
my
good.
understanding of it.
Yes, I think that's correct. They
That
they they
yeah,
they volunteer themselves to be proxies for the algorithm. Like, everyone just knows what the algorithm is, right? And so
yeah.
and they kind of accept the algorithm's place in their lives. Now,
And like the way the information is dropped on us is like, oh, the algorithm might have killed Simone's dad, but also he might be alive.
right, played by David Arquette. Um,
Wrestling world heavyweight champion David Arquette.
love David Arquette, and I got to say, he's looking pretty good after all this.
Don't ignore my wrestling references.
Yeah, I'm not ignoring. I watched the documentary about David Arquette. I know all about
Thank
his
you.
wrestling
Thank you.
stuff. So
Thank you.
I like how that you're taking that like as a compliment. So I find that to be just kind of like, uh, if not at worst frustrating, at best weird. Like, that you're
Mhm.
introducing this whole alternate dystopian universe, but then you do nothing to really build that out in any significant way. It almost, like, the world in the show almost is identical to the world that we live in for all intents and purposes. Apparently, there's no like famine or conflict or whatever, but like, we don't see any of that really. Like, we don't, I guess you can't not see a negative, you know what I'm saying? But like, basically what I'm saying is the world seems to be normal. Like, everything seems to be the way it is in our world, even
Mhm.
though there has been profound changes to society because of this algorithm. Um, Maximilian in the chat room makes a good point, which is like, Mrs. Davis is more like a social media parallel than an actual AI thing so far, and I would agree. Now, I love the ideas that the show is bringing up. One of the concepts I have read, Siddhant, is that, like, is listening to an algorithm really that different than listening listening to God? Listening to like a religious force, and how are those things different? But I don't feel like the show has done anything to really deeply explore that idea, because the show is so weird and so crammed full of plot. I feel like every episode I'm just barely like comprehending the setup before it's like, oh, the setup is resolved and now we're moving on to another adventure. Um, so I'm finding the show just a very odd experience. Okay, at the same time as all that stuff I just said, every episode there's at least two, three, four moments that are like really, really entertaining. Like, just really, really funny. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's largely because of the performances. Everyone is playing this completely straight. Like, no one is betraying anything that this is like one of the most weirdest, silliest concepts imaginable, and that really helps a lot with selling this thing. Yeah, go ahead, Siddhant.
Yeah, each episode has, some really spectacular moments. Like there's one action beat in the opening prologue where a nun who has just revealed herself to be part of the Knights Templar gets stabbed from behind with a sword and has the sword jutting out of her torso, and then she runs and jumps over a table, and with that sword that is sticking out of her, she stabs someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very serious, a very dramatic scene, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
cackled because it was this completely ridiculous thing that just happened. And so I think that in a way sums up the show's tonal approach, where you
Yeah.
will have like just constantly like bizarre stuff happening. um I guess I describe,
But that everyone is taking it deathly seriously, right? Like,
to a degree, everyone is taking things seriously, but also the characters all feel like they were written by the Kevin Feige robot in She-Hulk, with how much they just quip about everything as well. Like they
I,
are seriously immersed in the world, but at the same time, everything is like very snappy. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
I don't even know if I agree with you. I think the one character that does do that is Simone, aka
Yeah.
Lizzie, aka. But I think all the other characters, I feel like not very many of the other characters are very quippy. I mean, take
Okay.
the character of JQ, played by Chris Diamantopoulos, aka the guy Russ Hanneman from Silicon Valley, right? Like he is 100% earnest in every single one of his. There's not
Oh,
a joking
absolutely.
bone in that guy's body, in that character's body.
I I, I
So,
think I think
that's what I like about the show is that Betty Gilpin is kind of the audience. She's the only one reacting even remotely close to what a human being would react to how weird everything's going on in the show. You know?
Right. I'm not necessarily saying that folks like JQ and Wiley are, deflating the tension or like too
Mm.
sarcastic about what's going on, but they are constantly like making jokes, like JQ's Bourne references and all that. It's again, he takes himself very seriously, but there's like every line
Again,
is a joke.
that's not a joke. That is, he's saying, for first
Right.
of all,
He's not making a joke.
yeah,
He's not
yeah,
making a
yeah,
joke, but it's a
yeah, yeah,
joke to the audience, is
yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely, definitely. No, no, that's fair enough. Um, but I think we're pointing to this tension of the
Yeah.
things that they're doing are really funny and ridiculous, but like no one in the show realizes it. No one in the show
Yeah.
realizes that what's happening is ridiculous, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Maybe
theoretically one of the pleasures of the show.
I guess my Marvel comparison was off base. I went for the low hanging fruit there without
Yes,
fully considering the implications. I
yes,
apologize.
it's okay, it's okay. So anyway, we have tried to convey the odd experience of watching the show. But yeah, any other overall thoughts before we get into specific topics? I think just it's a weird experience. It's unlike any other show I've seen, and I'm not sure it's for everyone. I can easily
It's
see people
definitely
getting.
not.
I can easily see people just getting frustrated and giving up. Like that's
For sure. I can't
yeah,
even tell you if it's for me, and that's a big question mark. But
yeah.
yeah, tonally, I think I describe it as magical realism. But if you couldn't really locate where the actual like magical stuff was, that doesn't necessarily make it realism. It just makes it like, no, wait, what am I supposed to be looking out for here? That's
Indeed,
strange, but is it? Is it? It is. It kind of. It's like being gaslit by a TV show. Like I guess. Like there's some. Is that something? No, that's no. That's weird. Is that? Huh?
indeed, indeed. All right. Well, Siddhant, before we get to specific topics, let's talk about something that I can endorse. And that is that this episode of Decoding TV is brought to you by the McDonald's app. And specifically, I want to talk to you about my newest life hack, Siddhant Adlakha, which is the McDonald's app. I order in the app, I pick my favorite location, I select curbside or counter, and head to McDonald's, and I can grab my food faster. They prep it while I'm on the way. It's like a VIP experience you never knew you needed. Say you want to go to McDonald's for lunch, but you don't want to deal with a lunch rush. You're a busy person, Siddhant Adlakha. You got IGN and IndieWire, beating a path to your door and saying, "Give us those sweet, sweet movie reviews." You don't have time to deal with the normal lunch rush at McDonald's, so just download the McDonald's app. Order ahead, pick your location, select curbside or counter, and you can pick up your food when you get there. They prep it while you're on the way. Order in the app, select curbside or counter. That's it. There's many reasons why you'd have to skip the line, right? You're writing movie reviews. You're watching episodes of Mrs. Davis to prep for decoding TV. I mean, these are the two most important things a human could possibly be involved in, right? But you don't even need a reason. Just maybe you deserve it because you're an amazing person and you're like, I want to get McDonald's food really, really quickly. If that describes you, I would highly recommend you check out the McDonald's app, order ahead, get your food really quick and right away. Siddhant, go ahead. It sounds like you want to say something. So.
No, I'm just fascinated by that completely impromptu rant you just went on that came out of nowhere. Thank you for including me in that ad read.
You're welcome. Well, order ahead in the app to save time. Prep while on the way excludes drive-through at participating McDonald's. Copyright 2023 McDonald's. Thanks to McDonald's for sponsoring this episode of Decoding TV. All right, let's talk about some specific topics from Mrs. Davis episodes 1 through 4. We talked a little bit about tone. The biggest question I have is around the tone. This is one of the weirdest shows I've ever watched. I know I just brought up Beau is Afraid on a recent episode of This Week in Streaming, but many scenes remind me of that film in the sense that this is a ridiculous, outrageous thing that is just being played completely straight. I also feel like there's a lot of inspiration and vibes I get from Richard Kelly's Southland Tales, a movie that no one I know has watched other than film critics. But it also features a kind of dystopian future with high stakes where nothing just feels right. Nothing feels like it should. But I also think the show is just very funny. Like there's a lot of individual moments that I just think are really, really hilarious. Particularly with Betty Gilpin being annoyed and exasperated with all the madness around her. And that really helps me to enjoy the show on an episode-by-episode basis, even as the broader purpose and the direction of the show eludes me. So how do you feel the show balances these kind of different tones? Is it a mess or is it masterful like clockwork? What do you think, Siddhant?
I don't know that I can think of it in either of those terms because, on one hand, no, it's not a mess, but it's not a mess because it knows exactly what it's doing. A mess is when stuff is just strewn around your room in a random order.
Yeah.
But this show doesn't place things neatly on the shelf. It just, it puts your socks on top of your TV. Your underwear is folded neatly, like in your coffee cup. It's meticulous and intentional in what it does, even if what it does makes you like really scratch your head sometimes.
I
Again,
think
it knows
I
what
think-
it's doing.
I think a great way to describe it would be it's very confident. Like it takes a huge amount of confidence to put the stuff that happens in the first 4 episodes on screen and expect people to go along with it. I think, and I say that it sounds like a backhanded compliment, and it kind of is, But yeah, go ahead. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Siddhant.
No. I'm. That's completely true. But at the same time, I think where I have trouble is the fact that even the characters, or at least even Simone, doesn't seem fully sure of what's going on around her, and not in a way that's like, "Ooh, I gotta solve this mystery," but in a way that's like, okay, like the 4th episode, which was the last one in the first block that was released, just ends with like a whole bunch of new information and her essentially saying, "Wait, what the fuck?" And it's like, yeah, I feel that way too, but also like I can't really tell what's driving her beyond like, fine, I guess I'll do this. Okay, fine, I guess I'll do the thing. And that's not, a super compelling reason to go along with things. And yeah, I know there's that thing of like, she dislikes Mrs. Davis, the algorithm, because maybe her dad I cannot pass the dad stuff. Like I know, like, okay, the algorithm was probably responsible for her dad's death, but that's something that is sort of, thrown out with like a little hand wave, like, oh yeah, and that too. It doesn't seem like it really resonates for her emotionally.
I mean, that's one of the problems of the show is that everything is so outrageous that nothing really hits. So I'll give you an example. Simone, the protagonist, as a young child, tries to go into her mom's secret room in their house, only to find that there's a booby-trapped crossbow that deploys and shoots her through the abdomen, right? Theoretically, almost killing her, right? Could have easily killed her.
Hmm.
That event would be enough to make a whole show about right there. Like that's, or at least a whole season of television could be about like the trauma from that incident. Instead, it's like, and we're on to the next thing. It's referenced a couple times, but it's like, was that traumatic for Simone? Did the parents feel bad? Like maybe we'll find that out as the show goes on. But like, it's also very possible the show could never mention it again. And it's
Yeah,
hard.
because
It's
it's
hard.
also
It's hard to like invest emotionally in a show if stuff like that is happening and it just doesn't feel like it's spending time. People don't feel like they're spending time on it, and they don't feel like they're reacting to something like that like a normal human would. You know?
yeah, it's part of like, the weird texture of the show, but also it's inadvertently like, oh, this is just a plot point to show you how she met Wiley when they were kids.
Right? Yeah. It's very very odd.
Yeah, but again, I do love some of the oddities, like, Wiley's at this hearing with a bunch of lawyers to talk about his inheritance now that he's turned a very horrible looking 25. Um, then this cowboy walks in and starts accusing him of not being a man, and then that sets him on a whole like existential crisis, which in turn leads to like, Simone's finding faith. And it's one weird thing after the next that, individually it's like, yeah, this is interesting, but the so little of it is like connected to the larger fabric of the show, because everyone has either, some kind of god or some kind of algorithm in their ear just telling them what to do, and so it doesn't feel like anyone really has any agency. But at the same time, no one is really like, apart from the few times they mention it, no one really seems to um rub shoulders against that fact, like, oh, this is a story in which I'm trying to establish my own agency. um like I can't pin down what the show is about, and I don't mean in a plot sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I get it. I
We've
get it.
just,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
I know what you're
there's a lot
saying.
of
Like what?
there's a lot of complicated shows like Lost, where describing the plot is, it's like tumbling down a mountain.
Yeah.
But you can tell what that show is about. You can describe the show emotionally and thematically in a few sentences. In this, I don't think you can do it even like almost 4 hours in, and I think that's a little weird.
And potentially problematic. Although we'll see once we get to the end whether it'll all add up. The scene that you're describing where Wiley is about to get a $700 or $800 million inheritance, um, he's about to give it away. That is a very that scene kind of sums up the whole show because on the one hand, weird things are happening left and right. No one is behaving like that is the actual situation that is going on, right? Because the actual situation is Wiley and Lizzie at that point have agreed they're giving away the $700 or $800 million, and they're going to take 80 grand and go to Alaska and be together, and it's going to be very romantic. That's kind of the premise, right? So he goes into the lawyer's office to make that happen. Now the thing that's weird is then this guy comes in and is like, "Hey, by the way, um, by the way, your grandfather gave you this money, and under one condition, it was going to unlock when you were 25 years old, but your heart wasn't going to make it till then. So I needed to pretend to train you to be a rodeo person, so that you would get in some kind of accident and then get on a heart transplant list or something along those lines, right?"
Yeah, his liver, I think.
The liver, yeah, one critical body part. Anyway, and it's just like, okay, like everyone's just acting so weird. Like this is not the gravitas that people would approach the situation with. And yet at the same time, that scene functions on its own as if that was like an SNL sketch. I think that would be a very funny thing where like this guy gives this huge monologue about how like everything in your life was fake. You actually have no rodeo skills. And then it's like, oh, but I was going to give the money away anyway. And he's like, oh, therefore I didn't need to tell you this story. That's like a funny setup and payoff.
Yeah,
but then it's
it
like,
has.
but and let me just finish. But it's basically
Sure.
like that's how I feel about the show. Is it's so outrageous and outlandish and ridiculous, And yet, on a scene by scene level, the scenes individually work really well, in my opinion. Um, the baker telling Simone that she always wanted to be Pope. This guy telling Wiley, "Hey, I faked all your rodeo training in a Truman Show esque situation." Like all these scenes, they work like on their own, mushed up together. I don't know that it really works as a show for me. Okay, I'll stop. Go ahead, Siddhant.
No, I appreciate that. And also, yeah, it has the tone. I'm coming back to the tone again, but
Yeah.
just like it has the tone and texture of an absurdist theater piece. Each
Yes.
scene does. Each scene
Yeah.
feels like an Ionesco play. But the thing about absurdist theater or any like absurdist performance art is that there is some kind of emotional truth and emotional honesty
Mhm.
underlying the absurdism, and I can't find that in this show. And I'm not terrible at finding it in most places. Like
Yeah.
you give me like a total, wacky piece of shit. You give me that viral video from 15 years ago where like a woman is, peeing in like spaghettios or something. I'd be like, no, 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 I get that. Um,
Wow.
just forget that
Siddhant,
I said that.
Siddhant revealing
No,
his
no, no,
secret
no, no, no.
playlist.
Hey, 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 hey.
But I
I'm
think I
classy.
think
I'm
I
classy.
think
It's okay.
it's the same issue as when we were discussing Westworld about a year ago, Siddhant Adlakha, which
Mhm.
is we don't know what we're watching. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
What I mean by that is like, is it? Are we watching Wiley talk to some rodeo guy, or is that guy controlled by the algorithm, or is this all just some dream that Wiley's having? Like, we just oftentimes we don't even know what it is we're watching in the show. And I do think that's a problem when it comes to getting to the emotional truth. But at the same time, the scenes work really well. Like there's many scenes I really enjoy. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about the show. Let's talk a little bit about the spirituality, Siddhant.
Mhm.
Obviously, a huge part of the show has to do with God. Simone is a nun. She uh, she meets in a diner with a mysterious man who we later learn is Jesus. Props to the show for not having a white Jesus, by the way. That's great and historically accurate. But yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts on the deployment of religion in the show. Like, what do you think about how the show handles religion and spirituality?
I think on one hand, I am amused by the literalization of the idea that a nun is someone who is married to Jesus. Sure, and but I think it all of it only seems to function on a literal level right now. You know, there may be these weird, occasionally abstract things happening from time to time, but like it's the way it the way religion, spirituality, Jesus, all of it, the way it manifests in the show is a strictly literal thing that doesn't feel like it has too many spiritual implications, which is weird. It's like I get the thing of like, oh yeah, what if Jesus was a real dude you could meet and interact with in a dino and get married to, but at the same time, the show is also saying, but what if you didn't have the real world relationship you did to Christian doctrine? What if that was just we put that all aside? Actual questions of like faith and understanding your place in the universe, understanding your purpose, all of that. You forget all that. It's like, what if Jesus was a real guy? And that's it. That's the extent of it.
I don't know that I think it's quite that facile or shallow as what you're describing. I mean,
Okay.
I think that it definitely goes to that level. Like it definitely at least crosses that level of, yeah, what if Jesus was a real dude? Like what would that be like? What if Jesus actually was interested romantically in people? I think that the show is starting to hint as of episode 4 at the idea of like, hey, David Chen, have met women in my life who are like, I am married to Jesus. Like,
Hmm.
like who, from my religious upbringing, like that is how they conceptualize and talk about Jesus. And what I like about what the show does is it complicates that idea, right?
Yeah.
Because it says basically, what if being married to Jesus is not all it's cracked up to be? That's kind of what the show is starting to ask in episode 4 of like, there's actually potentially a lot of downsides. For one thing, you got to share Jesus with a lot of people, you know? and that's probably one of the biggest things. And I assume we're going to find out more shortcomings of it.
Yeah, true. But also, so far, maybe this will change. But so far, Simone's crisis of faith when it comes to being married to Jesus is, this is mildly annoying. And so far, I don't think that's like the most compelling conflict when it comes to being married to the Lord. I can't seem to hear anything. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, sorry. Carlos Cruz Cordero in the chat says this show is as concerned with Catholic doctrine as Steven Spielberg is with Christian doctrine in Indiana Jones, basically. And I don't know if, and this is what's so challenging about talking about the show is having not seen the rest, we don't know how accurate that is. Maybe it will become more interested in it as time goes on, but it's a fair critique that so far it's not as deep of an exploration as I would like. What I want actually is something like what I would describe as an unconventional depiction of religion, which is to say something like Kevin Smith's Dogma, or even Damon Lindelof's own The Leftovers, right? Like those Dogma, the movie, the show The Leftovers handled religion in a very interesting and different way. And this feels like it is of that vein. It feels like it's going down that path. And I'm curious where it's going to go. But you're right. So far, it's not like I've taken a lot of amazing lessons from this changed the way I think about God yet. But it feels like it could. Feels like it could go that way, So
Yeah, when it comes to interesting takes on religion, you gave a couple of really good examples, but I think right now it feels more like The Adjustment Bureau. You familiar
yeah,
with that film?
I'm very familiar. I like that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, you take all these, high-minded spiritual concepts, excuse me, and you make them these very literal, almost mundane things, to the point that I don't know really how this nun or even Jesus Christ feels about the Holy Grail. Like I
Right.
don't know like what either of them, if they have an opinion on it, which is like I after 4 hours of storytelling, like I should have like some inkling at least, I feel like.
Well, this is the thing that I'm finding such a challenge so far is that I've seen it's a weirdly weird experience reading TV critics write about the show because many TV critics have seen the whole thing, right? Like
Mhm, mhm.
Jen Chaney at Vulture, Angie Han from Hollywood Reporter, they've already seen the whole thing. So like, and they're saying, oh, this is an interesting exploration of like, um, ostensibly the Holy Grail part is like potentially a commentary on storytelling itself. They refer to how the Holy Grail is the ultimate MacGuffin. It is the thing that has been the driving force for many, many movies in our lifetime. And so it's like, is the show Mrs. Davis a commentary on storytelling and how stories get put together and like the things that drive and motivate us? Maybe. But I don't but you're right. 4 hours in, I don't know what it's trying to say about it yet. And I wanted to check with you, Siddhant, who's a much more intelligent commentator on movies and TV than myself. Like,
No.
am I missing something, Siddhant? And it seems like we're both in almost an identical place on this show right now.
Yeah,
Right?
I think the show seems to be missing things. Like, look, that person who gets stranded on the island in one of the early scenes and then
Yeah.
rescued with his cat, his name is Schrodinger. And I
Mhm.
think there's some kind of vague like science joke in there, like Schrodinger's cat, and like maybe there's like there is that mildly metaphysical element where like uh Simone ends up in like this dino realm, but like I don't know, is that just like a joke, like, hey, you've heard of this thing called Schrodinger's cat? Well, Schrodinger is a cat, you get it? Like, it's not that kind of, it doesn't end up
We'll
being a
see.
show where
We
that
do see
means
that
anything.
cat. We do see that cat at the very end of the 4th episode. So maybe I was worried we were never going to see that cat again. That plot
Do
line
we?
again.
Where?
It's in the video that she watches right at the
Oh,
very
okay.
end. There's that woman cradling the Grail, and then we see the cat in the video. So it's like,
Okay.
but yes, you're to be forgiven for not recognizing it because it's like,
Yeah, but it's not even like, but that's more like a Matrix deja vu kind of thing. That has nothing to do with like,
right,
forget it.
yeah,
Whatever. I
yeah,
was
yeah.
about to go off on a rant about like, quantum entanglement.
Well, okay, so I mean, you and I are both kind of like trying and failing to come up with what the show's trying to say at this point about literally any topic.
Mhm.
Literally AI, destiny, predestination, free will, determinism, spirituality, religion. Um, at the same time, multiple critics I have read said the finale is amazing. It ties everything together in a spectacular way. You gotta watch it. So I'm like, okay, I'm definitely gonna make it to the end. But I guess one question for you is like, if you weren't doing this with me, and you're not gonna be around for our Mrs. Davis conclusion episode, but like, let's say you were. As of right now, would you watch all the way to the end? Like, is this
No,
really? You would just abandon
no,
right now?
like I think so. Like,
Wow.
despite the
Even
fact that
after literally what I just said about like people saying like, "Hey, this is gonna be amazing at the end."
yeah, sorry,
Wow.
Angie, I love you. Like, um, yeah, the fourth episode like ends on a cliffhanger, and I'm still just like, eh.
Yeah.
Like when I watched it, it was recent. The fifth episode was available to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I wasn't going to watch it because I wanted to,
Yeah.
do
We
this recording only
exactly.
having
Yeah.
seen the first four. But I wasn't even tempted. Like I was like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about these four. I guess maybe at some point I'll read a synopsis for the fifth one.
Yeah. And
But
it's a bummer though, Siddhant, this like uh this is about an algorithm and how the algorithm guides things. A show like Mrs. Davis feels like almost like a relic. We are in a state of great upheaval in the entertainment industry right now. It's like
Mhm.
this is a show that would not be greenlit today, I don't think. You know what I mean? This was like greenlit in the heyday of like Peacock and Hulu and uh Paramount Plus. They're like, we got to make as much stuff as possible. And so like out of that, a very weird, odd show like Mrs. Davis is created. And it's just like
Yeah,
I don't think this would get created today. I think like
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it
And,
ended up also.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's just a bummer because I feel like we should try to support original storytelling of this kind, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's left us, mostly you, in a place where you feel like very, very uninvested in the final outcome of the show, right?
And I'm so conflicted because like the show does end up being prescient in some ways when it comes to yeah, I don't think like of course when it was first being written and conceptualized, I'm sure like AI was on people's minds, but recently with the explosion of
Yeah.
chat GPT and all that, it's become a much more frequent topic of discussion. Also, the whole thing of like getting wings in the show is a kind of scarily similar to like what the blue check has become on Twitter, which is like,
Oh
no, I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
do what it takes to get it. I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
give Elon my money.
I'm gonna buy a 40. I'm gonna overpay dramatically for a social network, just so I can
Yeah.
get the Babylon Bee back on there.
And what I feel worst about is that Betty Gilpin is really good.
Hmm.
Like I think the one thing that keeps me thinking like maybe I'll watch more
Yeah.
because I want to see her do her thing. And it's of course like it is incredibly distracting to me how much she looks and almost moves and emotes like Benedict Cumberbatch. Am I the only one who feels that way?
No, I don't. I mean, yes, yes, in the sense that I don't. That's not a comparison that I came up with.
No, I look at her and I'm like, that's Benedict Cumberbatch. But no, like regardless of
Okay,
that,
putting that aside.
she's phenomenal at what she does. Even
Mhm.
though I don't understand what she is doing most of the time, she is so invested in every micro emotion, every interaction, every joke, every dramatic beat. She's fascinating to watch. And I'm I think more than watching more Mrs. Davis, I might just like finally start Glow or something.
Yeah, I
Because she's
mean,
really good.
I agree. She is excellent in Glow. That's kind of the thing that made her a star. She is great in the movie The Hunt. If you've seen that movie, you seen The Hunt, Siddhant? Um,
Yeah, yeah, I have. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What I love about Betty Gilpin is she often portrays characters that are very sweet and kind, and that also literally look and feel as though they could kill you with their bare hands if necessary. And
That's true.
that is kind of the sense I get from this character, where there's obviously a fierceness to this character, where she has a lot of anger and rage. But at the end of the day, all she wants to do is spend some quality time with her husband Jesus in this in this metaphysical diner somewhere.
And
She's one of them.
his mango falafel.
She is one of the most compelling actors alive today, and I think that like this show is a showcase for her work. But yes, I wish the show was a little bit less weird and confusing. You know, so typically I would ask us to kind of try to predict what would happen in the rest of the show. Not really going to do that for this show. I think that what I am going to do is express some earnest hopes. And you know, I've heard multiple people say, "Hey, this is going to wrap up beautifully. This is going to tie everything together. You got to stick it all the way out." I would agree with you. I think if I wasn't talking about this for This Week in Streaming, I probably wouldn't have even made it to episode 4. I probably would have gotten to like 2 episodes and been like, I don't know, maybe, because there's enough like fun moment. Like every episode, there's like a really fun moment or concept or a fun like exchange of dialogue. But yeah, it's really gonna need to come together in a big way for me to be able to recommend this to people, you know? And also, the episodes are long. Like each episode is like 55 to 60 minutes. It's a big time commitment to not know where any of this is going or if it's going to be satisfying. But I hope that it will tie together in a big way. I hope that it will have an interesting commentary on AI versus religion and predestination and determinism, and like I hope it's gonna make me think about those topics in a deep way.
Yeah.
That's what I hope. I don't have any hopes for the plot because I don't think, you know, I can't even understand. I can barely understand even what has occurred. So I'm not going to predict what's going to happen next. But any closing thoughts on Mrs. Davis episodes 1 through 4, Siddhant Adlakha?
Man, I barely had opening thoughts. I don't like. I give it a go. Like, see if you like it. It may be for you. It's
Yeah.
clearly for like a couple of people. You know, someone's watching it.
Indeed. All right. Well, we have some favorite quotes from the episodes that we watched. But before we do that, Siddhant Adlakha, you want to let people know where they can find more of your work on the internet this week?
Sure, you can find me at Siddhant Adlakha on Twitter, and I usually link to all my stuff from there.
And if you are enjoying this podcast, you can find more episodes at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of Mrs. Davis or what you think about This Week in Streaming and what you think we should cover in the future. Find us also on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, at Decoding TV. We're posting videos there all the time. We'd really appreciate if you could check us out there. And next week, it's going to be Dead Ringers. We're going to be covering the rest of the first season. I think Siddhant and I both really love the first 2 episodes. And so I'm really looking forward to finishing up that season with Siddhant on This Week in Streaming next week. And stay tuned for a lot more stuff that we'll be covering in the future. Until then, Siddhant Adlakha, favorite quote from the episode. One of my favorite quotes. I mean, I thought Chris Diamantopoulos as JQ was awesome. Like, he's one of my favorite characters in the show. And he's everything he says is like complete nonsense. You know, it's really funny.
Yeah.
He's saying like, one of my favorite quotes is he says, "I'm JQR, but you can call me JQ." And it's like,
Yeah.
why? That's such a ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
already an abbreviation, you know. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I like he's Mo from the Three Stooges remake, and I also love that basically his approach to an Australian accent is what Gen Z thinks Australians sound like on TikTok. But my favorite quote, I believe it's in French, the opening. So it's subtitled as, "We did not consult with the Templar. We are the Templar." And then like a whole bunch of stabbing begins. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. It is a nice badass moment, you know.
Yeah.
But
it's a very like I respect women moment.
It's the most badass moment in a shoe commercial that you will see this year, and I'm including air in that formulation. So, you know,
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's really strong endorsement right there. All right, that's going to bring us into this week's episode of This Week in Streaming, part of the Decoding TV podcast. Oh,
you didn't see that. You didn't see anything.
Siddhant's microphone just fell down. It was very brutal.
Oh, did it? Was that a figment of your imagination? We're
Indeed,
in Mrs.
very
Davis.
much. We're channeling the show. He is Siddhant Adlakha. I am David Chen. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week with our coverage of Dead Ringers. Until then, goodbye.